in which I'm delighted to be sharing, in the role of David Dimbleby, to take your questions for a sort of question time final session about the themes of the day. The panellists we have for you to take your questions, not for reflections in response to yours, begin on my right with Dr. Costello, who gave our opening keynote lecture, and I'm sure he'll be keen to take any questions you have arising from the content of that. Professor Alan Rice, who along with Ray are two of the external members of the management board of the Centre for the Study of International Slavery that I work with. Alan is himself Director of the Institute for Black Atlantic Research at the University of Central Lancashire, and will be well known to many of you for his excellent work looking at the representation and memory of slavery in the Black Atlantic most recently. Sitting next to him is Dr. Miranda Kaufmann, who has worked extensively on early modern representations, early modern traces of history of black people in Britain. And to my left is our fantastic co-host, along with Miranda, organiser of the programme today, Michael Ohajuru. Michael is, as I say, has put together the programme today and has said that he's really bursting with ideas to hear your questions, but also to give his reflections on the overall themes and patterns that have emerged from the talks today. And finally, on my left, is Elizabeth Burke. Elizabeth is currently the executive producer for the Radio 4 series, Black in Britain, and so she's here today to, I think, listen and to hear about the different talks, but also I hope as part of the panel today to answer questions about her ideas and the plans the BBC have to try and represent the history of Black Britain better in their content. So without any further ado, rather than giving everyone a little opening speech and using up all our time that way, I want to actually start by taking questions straight from the floor, and we'll let 2 or 3 people respond to each question and let the conversation flow from there. Forgive me in advance if I step in and moderate things just in order to keep the conversation going on. But do I have a first question about anything you'd like to do at the end of the day? And Miranda suggested I remind you all that we're still planning to end at 6 to start the wine reception, at which, of course, the questions and the answers can continue to flow informally over the wine. But I think at the back there we have our first question.
Yeah, one to Elizabeth in particular. What's the approach you've been taking in terms of the research, who you've been consulting, and how you're choosing what will be the content of the program?
Well, I should probably just say a bit about how this project came about to start with, and who I am. I can't speak for the entire BBC sort of policy on history at all. I'm the producer of this series. I do a lot of history programmes on Radio 4. Don't know if you've had Voices from the Old Bailey, which Amanda Vickery presents. I've done another series with Amanda Vickery, one on masculinity. I did a series about called Disability in New History, which was 2 years ago. And they're all in this lunchtime slot, the Neil McGregor slot, the 15-minuters, which is great because it's a really challenging and interesting slot to make. It also gets a very big audience after the news. This series is going to be presented by a scholar who's not here today, she's in the States, Gretchen Gatsina. You probably know her book on Black England in the 18th century. And she and I met each other when I was making Voices from the Old Bailey last summer. And I was actually trying to get her to come and be in a programme and stand up a programme about Black Britons in court in the 18th century, and I couldn't really do it, partly because Gretchen wasn't around. But that's how we got talking then about this series. And I think this is very, very early stages, and I do feel an incredible fraud sitting here with this august line of people, and Michael kind of twisted my arm to do it. To talk about the series, because really I know less about it than anybody else in this room, and I'm planning at the moment, what are we going to do? I mean, the format is each day a little story, a little case history, a biography, which then zooms out to look at a very general issue. So I think the thing with these 15-minute programs is that what's lovely is a close-up about the detail of somebody's life, and as much as possible, any first-person accounts. And that's what I love about Voices from the Old Bailey, is that you can get people's actual voices on air through actors. In the disability series I did, I mean, similarly, it's disability is an area where there are lots of historians working now. It's very exciting. Some of the people we interviewed, they hadn't published, they were PhD students, but they were presenting research they'd found. And there's nothing better than somebody who's excited about finding a letter or a source, coming along, presenting it, talking about it, an actor reading it, and the audience love that, and I love that, because you're absolutely involved in the process of historical research, not just being told a history story. So I'm really just here to hear what people are working on, find the stories. As I say, we'll try to cover Britain. I mean, Gretchen's book just covers England and is very London-centred, so it's been interesting for me here to meet people who are working in Preston or doing work in Scotland, because we'll be doing some location work where we actually go to, as much as possible, go to a house in Bristol, go with Ray, down to the water here to talk about black sailors. So we'll have some location work, little case studies, and then general themes. And I think we will try to take in some of the first-person narratives and look at new critical accounts of first-person narratives of what it was like to, wherever we have autobiography, we'll use that too, obviously. But I'm being a bit general because we haven't yet got a fixed plan on paper. I'm still talking to people.
I think you should take Happy to Wales to Irving. Do you know that story?
No, I don't know that story.
Happy has a good story in Irving from Wales story.
Right, okay.
Irving, the coach boy at Irving.
Oh, him.
Yeah, you do have a theory about it.
She's got so many good stories.
But you need to get some Wales in your Britain.
But basically, I'm here having a drink after, so if anybody's got new research, new stories, if you've got strong feelings about what I should definitely not leave out of the series, just come and tell me, because it's incredibly helpful to me.
That poet, coach boy at Irving, grew up to be John Eastwood. If there's any Welsh people there,
Are you
I'm
sure
sorry.
it's the same person?
Yeah, the little coach boy
Yeah.
in downstairs,
Yeah.
they all had paintings, all staff, all
I
man.
found a portrait of John Eastwood that's still in private hands in London. I know it's very good.
No, that's not the same one, man.
Okay. I can see that we've already identified a controversy. A controversy that can take up a 15 minute. Order please, panel. Order please, panel. I can already see that we've got a 15-minute controversy for a programme there. I think Alan's got a different point to do with broadcasting.
To do with this kind of aspect, in that I think the thing which I found when I was writing Radical Narratives, my first book, was that actually we've all got these stories. I found a story which related to my own grandfather, and he worked in an Arab stud in Sussex called Cravat Park, the Wilfred Scarlett Blunt's household. And his father was a gardener, and when his father was a gardener, the person in charge, the major domo, that is, he was in charge of many white servants, was a black servant called Pompey. So one of the things I think is going to be quite important in this is to actually not always talk about the slave boy who's a coach boy, but also the one who's actually risen up the ranks and he's bossing around people like my granddad who's going, my great ear. So I think the nuances will be really good.
I'm going to come back to the audience for another question to take the conversation on in a new direction. I think I saw a hand from Chris over here.
I just wanted to return to something that Dr. Costello raised this morning. I think it was quite a provocative point in his keynote, and I wonder whether we thought about it, because we are discussing this thing called...
Sorry, can you speak a bit louder? I couldn't hear what today.
It's actually, it's more of a question to the rest of the panel based on something you said, which was this sort of difference between compartmentalizing Black British history versus integrating it, or integration versus compartmentalizing. And this, I think, is something that might be useful to return to everyone else.
I think I'll go to Michael first and come to you, Ray.
That's a great question. Let me tell you a bit of background. We finished the last conference, and the comment was made about the Notting Hill Carnival. Now, Notting Hill Carnival was being broadcast as Europe's biggest street party. And there was some members of the panel were frustrated because this was a black festival, and so it's being hijacked by the English Tourist Board and become an English festival. But and I started to think about that. We didn't include on it, but these are my thoughts. the festival comes from Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras was celebrated in the 14th century here in Europe. And they went out to the Caribbean and they did Mardi Gras. They gave that to the enslaved, and then the enslaved brought it back. And there was an artist called Alcala. Was it Alcala? He said a great thing. He said, time is a circle, not a straight line. So in terms of this compartmentalizing thing, yeah, you can do it for a time, but inevitably things moved on, and the circle comes around. So yeah, right now this is Black British history, but inevitably, by its logical consequence, conclusion, it's British history. You know, it goes round and round. So, I, for the time, yes, but for the ages, we're all linked.
I'm going to come to Ray and then Miranda.
Yep. Yes, the problem is that you do get a compartmentalisation of Black history. It really worries me. Richard and I have had a conversation many times in that transatlantic slavery is accepted in the part of the school syllabus, but not Black history as such. All you need to, and then, you know, there's post-colonial history. But then again, there's a time limit on that. And it's divided. It worries me, and not only that, not only time limits, but also, if you choose the wrong topic, for instance, I might be doing, you know, Black residents in Liverpool in the 19th century, or whatever. If they're not slaves, like the Black loyalists who were arriving in Liverpool, as many did, like that Peter, whatever his name was, Peter Salisbury that I showed you before, and it doesn't come under the slavery banner. I really think it needs to be decompartmentalised.
Miranda.
So, I mean, I think that this is a wider issue in the cycle of history, that we're at a stage where people have dug their own little very small holes into tiny bits of history, and there's a big fear about writing grand narratives to some extent, certainly in our field. And I think we need an update on Friday. But I also think in the meantime, something you said this morning, you were saying, oh, you know, they were trying to make us learn about Churchill and Nelson and Cromwell. But I think it's about what questions you ask of those topics, because I can get that back to Black history in one sentence for each of those, and I'm sure you all can too. So it's about the approach and the questions you ask of the past.
Okay, because I think this is a really great question, pulling together a lot of things today, I'm going to actually go to Alan and then Elizabeth if you'd like to come in on this question of should we be putting together, should Black British history be a topic, or should it be that history has Black British experience put back into it in every aspect?
Well, I think the latter, and I think it's better when it's the latter. I think you just have to mention one person's name, and that person is Robert Wedderburn. There we have Robert Wedderburn sitting there in London, shouting his head off about Peterloo, you know, and there we have him in his correspondence, in his writings, anti-royalist writings, a working class hero and a black hero. And I think that we shouldn't compartmentalise. And once you compartmentalise, you lose the full meaning of these people. Now, Robert Wedderburn should be really famous. He should be as famous as Equiano and Douglas and etc. Why is he? Because he wasn't a slave.
Yeah, he doesn't fit the category.
He doesn't fit the categories. He was a free black who came from Jamaica. So, you know, I talk to Americans about Robert Wedderburn, and their faces go as though I'm talking about someone from Mars. I mean, this person is dynamically important in a black Atlantic setting, and no one knows about him nearly enough. So I think that you know, our compartmentalisation, the way we follow American scholarship blindly, like a load of mice going, yes, just means that all we ever end up doing is kind of missing what's unique about British and Black British.
Well, I've sidestepped that problem by studying a period before America existed.
Elizabeth, can I ask you to come in on this if you have any thoughts about this topic?
I guess none of us want labels, and we don't want everybody to be categorised neatly. I suppose what I'd say is that a series like my disability series, which is still online, we just left it online for anybody to listen to, was actually, it could sound really sort of worthy and of niche interest, but it's incredibly funny and rich and illuminates the whole of 18th century life, I think, and shows a society in which there was so many people had these common experiences, and they're experiences we can relate to. And I suppose for me, what I just get excited by stories and voices that not everybody knows, and I think people don't know this stuff yet. I mean, until they know the stuff and they're going, oh God, not Robert Wedderburn again, we're going to, want to tell the story, and then at some point, it'll be part of the history curriculum and part of the history books, and we won't need to. But I think at the moment, we're at that moment when it's quite nice to sort of pick it up and bring it to people, because I don't think it is well known, the things I've been hearing today.
Well, it's a serious gap in our general education. For instance, James Brown said to us on the Victory, and his son became the first newspaper publisher, a newspaper editor, I should say, in Liverpool. His grandson was a deputy High Court judge. Nobody knew anything about him in Liverpool because he didn't fit any of those categories.
Yeah.
Got our next question over here.
Yeah, I did want to pick up this thing about teaching of Black history in schools, because I think it also ties into something that Ray mentioned in his keynote speeches, which was about the idea of Black history sort of bubbling on the fringes of academia. I mean, compared to most conferences I go to when I'm an academic, the number of independent researchers I've heard from today is really notable, and the relative balance of independent researchers in this field to academic researchers is striking indeed. And I think that sort of raises questions as, the universities are the places where tomorrow's history teachers are currently studying their history to go on and teach. And if historians of universities are not engaged with these questions and these debates, then they're not going to train that new set of history teachers to do something different. And you continue to have the national curriculum, but actually, if the teachers don't know the arguments and don't know the stuff, then that's a difficult thing. And I wanted to have
Ray, I was going to go to Miranda first on that. Just recently been blogging actually specifically about the experiences of working with teachers who are Black history in schools.
Well, my sister's a primary school teacher, and I wrote a blog with her just before Christmas. And she came to an event with me, and I think, now what do I think? I think that with the curriculum battle, that's going to wage on, and that's a long-term goal. In the short term, as you say, we need to reach teachers in the classrooms now, not even the ones that are still at university. We want to get to the chalk face today, and it's not even a chalk face anymore, isn't it? So that's how far I am away. But my sister has a nice whiteboard in Ealing somewhere, and get on there, one that you have to, which is primary school, it has to be something to do with literacy, numeracy, or science. And so we thought literacy was the easiest way. And she's actually started writing a lesson plan based around an extract from S.I. Martin's book, Jupiter Williams. We put it up on my blog, so if anyone wants to answer a question, we might start a prize. But anyway, sorry, I'm rambling. Okay. But I think literacy, the thing is, you've got to dress it up to meet the goals that are already there. You don't need to change the curriculum, you need to change the mindset of the teachers. And we have to go straight in there and talk to teachers now. And all of you know at least one teacher in your life. Go home and tell them what you've learned today,
I've got Ray, Michael, and Alan.
That was my job, actually. I was advisor for race equality in Liverpool, and to this day, I still work with the Black Achievers unit that does precisely that in schools in Liverpool today. Unfortunately, all the people here, for instance, have got their hands into Black history in some way. But because it's institutionalised in this very tight way, there's no such thing as an academic Black historian. You might say, well, you've got a PhD, right? Yes, but it was in the 18th and 19th century. I actually studied, 18th and 19th century European history. And for my undergrad, it was Anglo-Saxon history. So no one can accuse me of not knowing about the grand sweep of British history, or other people, or certainly Richard as well, and Alan. But the problem is that Black history is just out there, as lots of people say, bubbling away. all of those people have to sort of almost try and convince the departments that it's okay to do this, and give them the time to do it. It's not really part of the institution. It's, even though, I mean, they're very creditable people and good reputations in that area.
I'm going to come to Michael, then Alan, and then maybe to Elizabeth.
It's very close to my heart, because it's one of the reasons I do these conferences, because I feel that history has failed. Not just failed black kids, but it's failing. That's why the departments are closing, the humanities departments are closing down. And I think the real reason is they're not making, many do not make history relevant. They do not make connections. The exciting thing about black history is that you can make a connection, you can make it relevant, you can make it interesting. And I challenge these historians, academic historians, to make their history relevant rather than addressing each other. Come and address the people. Make it relevant to the people. And particularly, my vision is, and I think about black kids who leave care and have to go into the community, they have to fend for themselves, to give them an identity. And often their identity is imported American ones. And I think that's our fault, because we've not given them the visions, the role models, the history, the education. And we are part of that. And we have a duty of care. I put it very clearly, a duty of care to pass on to them, to give them the stories, the visions, the ideas. Or else, okay, I know it sounds you've gone too far, Michael, but I believe a lot of this radicalization is poor teaching, it's poor history teaching. In terms of they're not that critical thinking. They're not taking a world view on the things that history teaches you. Not just black history, but history in general. So, as I say, as you can sense, I'm frustrated with this. The answer is the academics should be forced, but they should examine themselves and think, what does it mean to those people leaving care, those 15, 16-year-old boys and girls leaving it, black and white? How does it help them with their identity, who they are, how are they going to operate in the world?
I think it's partly about methodology and having the right methodology for the right audience. And I go into schools with and use drama, and that's how I have developed a dramatic tableau for stage show, which I use with the national curriculum. I've done it from age 8 to age 18, etc. But in order to kind of do that, I need to be invited. In order to be invited, I need to have time from my university to develop the materials for it.
That's what I was saying.
For them, they won't give me the time to develop the materials unless I develop them commercially. If I'm not going to develop them commercially, because I'm an institution with no money, I'm not one of these grandiose places, they're not going to do it, So one of the problems is that actually there's lots of us out there wanting to do black history in the ways that might be interesting, but my institution gives me a hell of a lot of support. But in the end they come back to, we can't afford your time to develop that unless you're going to get some money from someone. And until we get some money from the Department of Education for actually specifically in this area, then, because the higher looting places aren't really doing anything. People who've got some money and, have kind of large amounts of money aren't really doing very much. So I'm actually at the moment trying to get some funding applications together to try and think of ways of using getting stuff out there a bit more readily because of these problems.
Elizabeth, presumably the series you're doing will actually, one of the great things for the audience it'll be grabbing will be presumably a large number of students, but even more importantly perhaps teachers will be hearing programmes and picking up on ideas.
There's a huge appetite for history on Radio 4, as everybody in this room I'm sure knows, but you do get these huge listening figures. It's kind of amazing and humbling that you can get 2 million people listening to history programmes on Radio 4, and then with podcasts, and as I say, you just left it online in perpetuity, not because anybody would ever pay you any money to do that, but it's heartbreaking when you've done a lot of work not for it to disappear. So all of those programmes are still there for anybody who wants to use them or teach from them or whatever. I mean, there is a huge appetite, and that's I guess where I come in. I mean, to go back to something Michael was saying, I know Gretchen Gatsina, the presenter being an American, said she feels that people she knows in the States have a very strong sense of their own heritage, their own history. But when she comes to Britain, she feels black people she talks to here don't. Now, is that provocative? Do you think that's true? They have not such a strong sense of their own history.
At the beginning of the very process.
Yeah.
Not being. The thing is, you see, the trouble is, people see black history as a usurpation of white history. It isn't that. It's filling in the gaps, the missing gaps. I mean, for instance, when it sounds like I've done my own book here, but when I did Black Salt, and I covered Trafalgar, and the hundreds of black sailors who were at Trafalgar, and what they did, people were quite surprised. But what, they were always there. But no one ever mentioned them, nobody knew they were there. All they knew is England expects every man to do his duty. But what Nelson meant was literally every man, whoever you are. He knew they were black sailors. He'd known them since he was 40 years of age when he went on that expedition with only 38 men on the ship with Equiano.
Let's take our next. And I'm going to move on, if I may, to take our next question over here.
Well, there's another one I want to say. Business of exclusion. You know, you're saying about excluding people from the history, and you saying that's kind of like perhaps, the kids coming out and care. What about gang members and that? And what about Muslim boys? I mean, I often think now that if they've been welcomed into Britain, Muslims years ago, and found a place here because they were in the history and they were in the school and what have you, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing now. It's because they've never been accepted as part. But that's just one separate thing. What I did want to say before was just thinking about the books that are used in schools, because only when I began to look at them, some of the stuff that's in those school books, I don't think historians have written them. They're just people who are doing it commercially and picking a penny off thing and the easiest and simplest thing to get their money. You need some, if we're going to improve things, we also need the resources in the schools, because, the teachers aren't going to make them for themselves, or a lot of them aren't. I just think that's another issue with the publishing. I don't think they earn their money really.
So on the quality of textbooks in schools,
Yeah.
Miranda.
Well, I think there's some good news on that front, because I know that Marika Sherwood and some others are working together at the moment on a new textbook for the migration part of a new exam to do that. But so it's not as bleak as. And I think the other thing is the reason we're all here as well. Part of the reason we were bringing this together is we want to have these conversations in this way, and then try and go forward and develop and help each other to work out some solutions to these problems, rather than just stating the problems again, because I'm sure you've heard a lot of these problems before, Audrey, as well.
Can I just briefly comment?
Alan, very
just
briefly.
on resources, the North is often ignored in terms of slavery, but there's a really good resource about Manchester and slavery called Revealing Histories. The website there is an incredible resource. So if you're working on that area, that might be something to do.
I'm gonna move on and take another question, and I think the nice thing about this is that the question's really building into a conversation as we go, so we can revisit some of these points. I think I've got my next question. Questioner has moved, so I've lost them. So I'm going to move to Alex here.
To me, we seem to have gone backwards over the last 10 years. And I think you probably would agree with me, Alan, especially, going back to 2004-05, where we had the DFES behind the Understanding Slavery Initiative, teachers were being trained, excellent resources, publishers were responding, some really good books in schools, and then what? It's lost its profile, is what I think. And so the solution to me is you've got to get that profile back up there. But it's got to bombast. It's really got to go. We've got to go everywhere.
Come to Michael for a quick response there.
And you're right. And part of one of the outcomes of this, one of the legacies of what we're doing today, will be. For those the man here. No pressure. Will be a database of a collection of all the resources, of bibliography, of people, of ideas. So things aren't lost. So it's not just us sharing ideas occasionally at conference. It is a resource there. And the vision is going to be crowdsourced. What does that mean? Well, if you've got something that you think is valuable, if you've got a series of lectures or training programs or ideas, you can put it, you'll be able to put it up yourself. Now, it's not there yet. We're working on it right now. We're getting nods. We're working on it right now. So it will be there. So that's we'll have some port of call. Because I understand your point about the lack of funding and how it's lost the momentum. And I doubt, if I be realistic, I doubt we'll ever come back with the way money is spent now. So we have to make it relevant and do it ourselves and give the teachers the resources.
Miranda? So I just want to quick comment. I listened to a really interesting radio documentary, probably on Radio 4, the other day with Hugh Muir, and he was talking about the BAME vote, and he was talking about, the election this year is going to be so tightly fought over every single vote, and I think that the politicians are waking up to the idea, certainly if they listen to that programme, that actually what they call the BAME is minority vote, it's actually a majority, quite a lot for the constituencies. And if we can get onto that agenda somehow in this debate that's going to happen in this country before May, then that's a really good, we've got everything to play for there, because all of the politicians will be fighting for every single vote. And if we can say to them, we'll vote for you if you do more in this area, then it might be worth starting that conversation.
Okay, I've got another question from Raphael. Who's there? Yeah.
I guess that's a more methodological, theoretical question. So if we talk about the compartmentalization of black history labeled here, and listening to the presentations today, I thought there was, because I think what I believe is has to be somehow also connected like class, race, gender, sexuality. And there's the risk sometimes to just focus on race, so producing in the end black and white narratives, which actually not reflecting historical truth, because there's these interactions I think are important, and I think this is something that needs to be considered, in black history, that we should know something about social history at the same time, like not just too one-sided.
And to answer that,
yeah.
filling in the gaps are open pages.
Yeah.
Whether it's gender issues, or it's social class, or it's race. I know that Richard shares my view that history is history, basically. And all we're doing is fighting, or making a point, or having forums like this to make sure that voice is heard. That's what it's about, basically.
Elizabeth, presumably those sorts of intersections of different identities and things are something that the series is going to be able to get into.
Yes, I mean, I was talking to Kathy Chater earlier about servants and talking about, I don't know, you probably all know the story of Perot, the black servant in Bristol who's been researched and written about, who was brought back as a former slave and then became a family servant. And it's a very interesting case study because he lived alongside the other household servants. He was, quotes, a freed slave, but the question is, was he treated any differently from the other working class people living in that household? What were the nuances of the relationship compared with the woman who came back with him, who'd I think never been a slave, but was also that? So you can talk about, you can ask these questions about gender and about class. And I think those questions are very interesting. And what was the relationship between the elite black presence in Britain, the sons of princes? You were talking about that. Sons of princes sent to Liverpool, among others, to be educated, rich as Croesus. What was their relationship with the servant in the family who had been brought back from the plantation? Was there any common sense of identity, or were they just, I'm rich, you're poor, you're the bottom of the pile, I'm the top of the pile? I mean, these are questions that really to ask, I think, about class and race.
Michael and Alan.
I was just going to make the point, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back to this.
That's okay.
About the vote. There's 200 seats in this country where the minority vote holds power. If it uses itself appropriately, it can hold power. But then you have to balance that against the recent failure of The Voice magazine to get black history taught in primary schools. And you could question the question they asked. But nevertheless, they wanted 100,000 votes. They only got 50,000. So there's a kind of, there's an apathy there. There's, you know, the black community, on the one hand, will complain, yet when it's given a chance to do something, it doesn't. So they've got power. Will they use the power? And I guess that's part of our job, to let them know. Let them know they have that power and use their vote, and vote, as they say in Northern Ireland, vote and vote often.
Alan.
I was just going to respond to Raquel's point, just by talking about, you cannot understand Douglas's visit to Britain in 1845-47 without understanding the fact of the galvanising of female abolitionists all over the country, so that we have in the second Irish edition of the narrative, we've got a list of the people that that you should send your goods to be sent to America to sell to help the abolitionist cause. Now, those lists of women, mainly 90, they're all women in fact, from women's anti-slavery groups, are in places like Halifax. They're in places like Glasgow, Cork, Limerick. You know, so when we tell the story of Douglas, we're telling the story of radical abolition, we're telling the story of women, we're telling the story of the provinces. And the problem is, only with the limitations of the historians trying to tell the story of Douglas, who haven't brought that stuff out. It's Nuna Sweeney in her book on Douglas and the Atlantic World in 2007, who finally actually read, you know, she read that second Irish edition, not as just a defunct variant edition, but an edition which can tell us something new. And I think that's what we should all be doing. We should all be looking for the nuance that goes beyond the limitations of our own idea of what black history is.
I realise it's a very dangerous thing to stand in the way of allowing the conversation to carry on in a little while over wine. So I'm actually going to come for a final question, I think, over there, and then to come back to everybody to have a final say in the audience. So I think, did you have a question?
Yeah, there was way back to
okay.
But I will make the point. It's half term week this week. Do we have any teachers in the audience? It's not a great one, but I did a teacher's CPD session recently, continuing professional development, on the theme of black history, trying to engage them using archive material, and they were pointing to horror. Now, whether that's because of the choice of materials, whether they couldn't fit it into the curriculum, or whether they just thought that their pupils would be interested, I don't know, but I found it worrying.
Okay, I'll come to everybody for a final sort of comment each. So we've got about 2 minutes each just to offer a final summation of the day. So shall I start with you, Ray? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure, yeah. I mean, no one supports this event more than I do, because I really do think that black history is something that should be put on the map in a way that actually it once was. As I was saying before, there's issues now about the radicalisation of young Muslim boys and so on. And one of the conclusions, coming back to what Michael was saying, that what goes round comes around, is, we should go. I mean, all the parties are saying this. We should go back to the day. We should actually not using that go back to the day. What they're saying is, we should learn about each other's cultures. We were doing that when the poll was plugged, as Alex said, more than 10 years ago, for no reason that we can think of, except that all the research prizes have gone, virtually. There's very few left. Most people are working independent within the educational policy, within their own structures and their own institutions, like most of us here. Apart from the fact that I'm retired. But that's one of the issues. We're going back to saying, maybe we should learn something about other people's cultures on both sides. We were doing that, but at the time, we were saying this was wasting time. As came up surprisingly last year with the poll committee thrown out. But, it's still an issue. It's more an issue now than it ever was, if you're talking about radicalisation. What I also mentioned mention responsibility. Everybody is looking to the Muslims. Sort yourselves out, will you? Sort yourselves out, will you? Nobody's looking at it from the other point of view. Why do people live in separate communities? Coming from one of the oldest, having 7 generations in my family of British born black, I can tell you that race has always been an issue, and it's not really something about that. There's nothing you can tell me. Mark, you just listen to my accent. There's nothing you can tell me about British culture, about English or anything else, or any aspect of it you can possibly think of. I know all that, and yet I can still be subject to racism on occasion, even now. So therefore, we should be getting back to the point that Alex mentioned. Alex is doing a grand job in their school, they're not schools. But where would Alex, I don't know, but I'm not going to personalise it to Alex's school or Alex, but I just wonder whether if you went back to those schools now, would they be the same? Don't tell me that.
Elizabeth, can I come to you for some concluding thoughts from the day?
Well, I mean, I'd like to thank you all for inviting me, for everyone for telling me your stories. I think it's exciting for me to see what a richness of research is going on, and I guess my only thought is that there seem to be a lot of people who are rather scattered, doing all sorts of things individually, without connecting up with each other in any sort of, coherent way. And to hear about this website, that sounds like a very good plan, because that's got to be the future, hasn't it? To connect.
Congratulations to these two.
Yeah, and this organisation, and things like today. But if I can help with that at all, or if you ever want the programmes put on your website or that sort of thing, that's what we've got to do, isn't it? Kind of join people up a lot more. I think.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Neil's point about archives. I think it's really important that the teachers aren't afraid of archives, particularly for 2 reasons. And that I sent my students out in about 2008 to kind of just get out there. And one of them went to Shropshire Archives, and Kathy Church is very interested in this, and that they found in the Shropshire Archives a Henry Box Brown playbook from 1859, and it was from his performance in Shrewsbury. And this, my undergraduate student found something which proved that Henry Box Brown was in the country at a time that even his biographer didn't know he was in Britain. So that was interesting. That was 1859. And the second thing was, around the time of remembering slavery 2007, people went into the archives and found things they'd never found before. And one of them was the life of the late James Johnson, coloured evangelist, an escaped slave from the southern states of America, a 40 years resident in Oldham, 1914. So this is his biography. It's very brief. Just going to read one paragraph, which will just show you that any of your perceptions about what black people in Britain were doing can be blown apart. I was worse than ever. He's escaped from the Civil War. He's now in Britain. So this is the 1860s. Cotton stockings and a pair of slippers in bleak December, friendless and homeless, roaming the streets of Liverpool. I walked over to Southport, and finding nothing to do, walked by Ormskirk, to St Helens, on to Warrington, then to Manchester, again on to Wigan, Huddersfield, Leeds, York, Barnsley and Hull, where I took to singing, dancing and rattlebones, which I found was easier than begging.
Michael.
Follow that. Okay, just some of the bad thing about it then, the bad thing. There's not enough children here, not enough students, and our vision was that we'd always have more, and we only had 1 student, my niece, my daughter, which is a pity. So that's a challenge for us. We need to address that when we go back. We need to think harder about that. The good news is that the fact we're here and still here now and talking about it, it still remains something close to our hearts. So the energy that we take away here, they're going to fuel us to take us forward. And how do I need to get involved in this database with us and build up so that we don't lose this momentum, we don't lose it in terms of, go back to the Elizabeth point, the point that we're all working independently. So that collectively, you know, what is it, out of many we are one and all that. But let's hope, let's not hope, it will. It will be a legacy that we can build on.
And finally, Miranda.
Yeah, well, nobody said it was going to be easy, is what I've written down in front of me here. Like most things in life, this is going to be really hard work. Most things that are worth doing are worth fighting for, and I think this is worth fighting for, and I hope that all of you think that too, and that all of you are going to help us drive this on forward and really make it happen this time, and at least die in the effort. And I think that's all I have to say. I'd just like to say thank you to you all so much for coming. Thank you for chairing that so wonderfully, Richard. Thank you for having us here. Thank you for making it happen. Thank you to everybody who made it happen. Thank you all so much for coming, and I'm looking forward to seeing you under a drink downstairs.
But before you go downstairs for wine, there is one thing that we need to do. Well, two things we need to do. The first is to make sure you fill out your evaluation forms and return them to Institute of Commonwealth Studies staff. And the second thing we need to do is to thank people from the Institute of Commonwealth Studies for the marvellous support they've given in putting the day on, for the opportunity which on behalf of the University of Liverpool, it's a great opportunity we've had to host this. But most of all, I hope I won't be upsetting Philip and others from the Institute saying, most of all we need to give a final round of applause to Miranda and Michael as the organisers.